let's get our Cataclysm on. As I mentioned before, I played this solo 3 times, 3 of the little scenarios. This is my first crack soloing the Grand Campaign, but today I actually had the opportunity to play a big hunk of the Grand Campaign, to be honest. I think we got through here, maybe all the way into there, but I think it was the 41-42 turn that we were in when we decided to quit. For a number of reasons. We weren't going to finish anyway, so... and I learned a lot of interesting things playing it opposed. Getting to see the things fiddling around, and got to test out my friendly Hitler strategy. I didn't play the Axis, but the guy who was playing them came upon basically the same idea, which was, hey, if you can it's fairly easy for the Axis to gain victory points, maybe. And if you can just start gaining victory points, why declare war? Now, I think that works fairly well in Europe. Where it doesn't work so well is in Japan, because the U.S. can turn its might. I mean, Japan's not going to get a lot of victory points unless they're attacking in China. And if they're not, if they're doing that, and U.S. aid is being put into China and everything, well, the U.S. is going to get all kinds of flags. They're going to be able to declare war on Japan. Sounds terrible? Maybe, maybe not. It was hard to tell. It turned out it was pretty damn bad for the Japanese. Basically, I was able to get a pile. I still got the Japanese shits to deal with. Basically, I had a pile of offensives, and I had been collecting these every turn and not being able to use them, and just throwing them into China to make sure that, the nationalists had an edge and that there was a decent Chinese force. Well, what ended up happening was I had them all free so that I could throw them into the cup when I declared war, and just blitzed across the Pacific. And the battle was really over here in Okinawa. Everything else had pretty much fallen. Yeah, there were some air bases over here, like Iwo Jima, but for the most part, yeah, the Japanese were just unable to stand against us. All right, let me fix the Japanese sheet there and figure out, I don't know why those piles are there. I think they're all up there. And then get started. There are a lot of special rules in play all the time. Each of the powers has their own little sheet. Each of the factions has their own little sheet of special rules, and there's additional ones buried in the rules. That's, some of the nature of trying to handle a game of this type. Anything, it's not like WIF doesn't have tons of special rules, or Axis Empires, or any of those. But here, there's a lot less of the regular rules and more of the special proportionally. All right, so the first thing is we look at flags. Germany's going to get 2 flags because Knight of Long Knives is out. One of the few things that doesn't have a counter. One thing I noticed very clearly, you're not going to be able to keep all of these, all of the bases with counters on them. Obviously there are not enough to cover everything. I could throw the French bases in and use them for the British. We did that in the game that we were playing, just because there's 4 of them, and the French are probably not going to get any bases. But the U.S. Very quickly storming across the Pacific used up way too many. They had to start grabbing bases and leaving some of their back areas uncovered, and that's fine. I just like the way they pop out when there's a base on them. That helps me, especially when you're right in the situation. So the Germans gain 2. Italy gains 1. Hey, let's take Il Duce. Russia is in military reforms, which means they're going to have trouble getting one. And the Japanese get one. Okay. And all of the Western allies have trouble getting one. Now, it turns out the U.S. cannot get any at this stage in the game. However, the Brits and the French could. by making a stability check. Well, I gotta check that. There might have been a Japanese flag there that I did not capture, and it would suck. Let's see. No, they're all unavailable. Yeah. Just making sure for the people who have flags available that, because some of the flags are already in the game. So, for example, the Russians already have a flag somewhere. One flag in the production holding box, 2 flags available to indicate that they have some political capability at this stage in the game. The decision on whether or not to make that stability check, well, it's fairly safe right now because the home front check doesn't have to be made. But how important is it is the question. The French are having, they're very ineffective. So, like, they're likely to go down and get a flag that doesn't help them. And that's really kind of the problem with the British, too. Yeah, you can start putting some failed political boxes in play. But I'm not going to make a roll for any of these guys. Still haven't figured out my strategy yet because the Germans are a little afraid. The Axis, I don't think, can get away with the friendly Axis as a strategy, at least not everywhere. And there's some problems. Okay. Production. Okay, we worry about that in increasing effectiveness order, so let's take a look at the French first. They have 2 areas of production. Now, their conversion limit is 2 to 1 right now, so they could spend these 2 to get 1 production. They can't build the fortress for 1 production. They can, however, spend this and put the dreadnought revision over here in the box for next turn. Doing that, it means they're not going to have anything left to put into reserve or anything, but that's okay. Our next country is Italy. Italy has but 1 production, which can't actually do anything for them. So we're going to convert that into an offensive marker, which we can actually do something with. Now, it's not guaranteed because we might hit rearmament or something, but we're not going to be able to produce anything with this pip. And that's kind of the big deal. Okay. Our next ones are US and Britain. Okay. Let's take a look at the Brits. The Brits get 2. Canada counts as home country. That means we can produce something. Well, we'll produce an air force. The US gets tons. They get 4, 7, but 1 of them is going over to Japan. So they only get 6 production there. And what do they want to build? Well, I want to get the naval working. So that's going to cost me 4 of my production to put that boat over here. So the Washington Naval Treaty, and boy, this is such a bummer. This is what froze me for a long time in the game until I just declared war on Japan. But it prevents the US from extending any of their forces outside of this line. And likewise, the Japanese can't extend outside of sort of this line. They can, in terms of military forces. That's a big, big deal. The Japanese can end the military treaty, the naval treaty at any point. Neither side can add navies to their force pool until that's completed, however, and that's until that's dismissed. And that's not necessarily terrible for the Japanese. They start off with 1, 2, 3, 4 navies, which It's about what the U.S. has, I think. Right? 1, 2. No, the U.S. only has 3. Oh, plus 4 out there. So as long as they're facing the U.S. alone, they've got parity, which is pretty decent. They're probably going to have trouble getting anywhere beyond that at any point in the game. I still have 2 production, with which I will build, I don't know what. Submarines are not an answer at this point in the game. I got in some trouble because my subs were like cluttering up the board and they were causing me problems. I could not move my fleets because there were too many subs in the water and they might hit one or something. That brings us to the Russkies. The Russkies have their military status, which means they didn't get their flag, but they don't have, well, they kind of don't want this because the only thing it does is it makes them militarily capable. Like, they don't lose their military. So they have a -1 penalty on all combats and on political purchase. Collective security is worse than that. Military actions are allowed, but you cannot convert resources to an offensive. So it's kind of hard for them. They don't have the -1 penalty, though, in combat under the collective security. So that's kind of neat. But I'd like to get that moved. I can't do anything about it right now. Production 1, 2. That's going to let me build one thing. I need to build some infantry. I don't have enough on the board. Gets me to the Japanese. Now the Japanese are at the 1-to-1 production. They have 1, 2, the US one, 3 for Manchuria. And what can we buy with that? Well, we can buy the carrier upgrade. That seems like a good idea to get moving on. And the other one, oh geez. You know, actually I'm not going to buy the carrier upgrade. I'm going to start building my navy. And the other point, probably have enough ground forces. Maybe not. Yeah, probably. Let's build an air unit instead. And finally to Germany. Germany is at that 2-to-1 civilian production level. They only have 1 resource. Same as the Italians do, which isn't very good. There's unlike, well, like with the Italians, there's not much I can do with that except create an offensive out of it. One thing I could do, one thing I can do, and I forgot about this or didn't really realize this, but you can actually reserve a resource and then you have it for the next turn. And that may be not a bad idea for the Italians and for the Germans. Keep those as resources instead of offensives. An offensive can be useful, but Germany at least doesn't have the army for it. The Italians can do it because they can get the Abyssinian adventure, which does some interesting things. This is how they get the Italian cube in Rome, which is an extra victory point, which is kind of cool. They also get a limited resource, which isn't all that terribly useful. So I think in both cases the production is a better case. At this point, we get to put things into reserve or the counter cup. Now this is not specified order-wise that we could find, but I think it happens again in the reverse order. The French don't have anything. The Italians, we're going to put Il Duce in here and bank a resource. The English and Americans might as well. You know, they'll just throw it in there because maybe they get a flag that they want to reserve. and that'll give them some advantages. The Russians are going to reserve a flag to try to do some kind of political action, if need be. And the Japanese will reserve a flag. And finally, the Germans will be reserving a resource in order to have money for next term. That gets us through there. It's time to start shuffling the cup. And now, something else that I screwed up in my plays of the game is I always did, hey, you can't trump in if you just trumped. That's not quite what it is. It's you can't trump in if aside from your faction just had its chit used. Now, one of the questions of that is whether or not your home front chit counts as one of your chits. I've been counting it as one of the player's chits because it's the same color, and I think that's what's supposed to be done, but maybe I'm mistaken. All right, let's think about who might want to do something. And honestly, if someone does go early, for example, well, let's say the Russians decide they want to do something, the Japanese could trump over them. The Japanese, you could ask, do you want to do something? But it doesn't mean anything until the Russians made their decision. It doesn't matter what order it happens in. So, do the Russians want to move their chit? Well, what are the penalties for my political position? And do I really need to do this now? I get to shift it when home front happens, so I'm probably going to hold my chit there. For the Japanese, is there anything that they really would like to do? I don't know. Okay, so the Washington Naval Treaty goes away if the US or UK become belligerent. It doesn't even matter whether it's with the Japanese. So, like, the only way you can protect the Japanese from them is to keep Germany from causing a war from coming out as well. And Japan can end the treaty and remove the marker at any time, and it doesn't require an action or anything. They can just do it when they want to. What do they want to do? Do they want to use that flag for something? I don't know. I don't think so. I think they'll hold off as well. So we're pulling from the cup. And we get our first thing. It's Il Duce. Well, what would he like to do? He gets 2 dice here, which is kind of an advantage. Compared to normal Italy. I don't know. Let me think about political actions. My stability is good, so I don't need to fix that. I can't do an alliance. Declaration of war, definitely not. Increased commitment, that might be nice at some point, but I don't know how valuable that is right now. I could do the Abyssinian adventure with this. Rolling 2 dice and trying to get an improvement there. Or I could do a diplomacy type action. Of course, this would piss France off. This would piss and be difficult. This would piss the English off. So, diplomacy is not necessarily trivial. I'm going to go for the Abyssinian adventure. So I go for 2 dice. I need a 5 or a 6 to succeed. I don't get it. I get a cube, though, in maneuvers, because in order to do the Abyssinian adventure, you need to do a maneuver. So that's what I was trying to trigger there. Okay. Now, anyone except the Axis could trump in. The reasons that I didn't want to trump before, which is mainly I want to see the home front counters come out, and what happens with them, are good enough that I still don't want to do it. We get a crisis. I'm going to keep the crisis over here. I think that's a better place for it. And there's a special table with just the crises. We get a 3-2, which is going to be a civil war. We roll 2 dice and use the highest result there. We get a 6. There will be a Spanish Civil War. Okay, well, that gives us something to do with offensives and the like. I believe the Spanish army disappears. Let me... This is 11.1. I'm pretty sure it does. I'm going to look up those rules and just make sure. There's a very procedural event here. No power occupies it with a land area, so the Civil War is not going to be suppressed. Then non-land units must... okay. Somewhere. And remove any minor army in the area. That's what we were looking for. But there's more, none of which happens. Any non-land units must immediately retreat. If it's a country, you remove the power's cube. If a home or colony area, you place a neutral cube. And if there was a power that controlled it, they'd be able to intervene immediately with some of the remaining regime in terms of how it would be affected. That's one crisis down now. All right, we get a British plane. I see no reason to move it anywhere, so we'll just drop it in there. Japanese plane. Put this here. That's doing fine there. I could shift it immediately. Where would I want to shift it? I don't know. I mean, I don't really need 2 planes in Manchuria just yet. There may be a time when I do need to move things, but this isn't it. We get another crisis. And you can see there's sort of this random flow between the chit flow, the random events, the high dice effects. A lot of the game is just very variable, which is why you'll never get, the historical, basically. Powers with a cube in an ungarrisoned Chinese country with no Chinese armies must perform an effectiveness check for each. They remove the cube and retreat all non-land units from the area. Okay, that's 1. The Russians, they have 2 dice for effectiveness checks. They succeed, so they get to stay there. Being there isn't necessarily that big an advantage. It actually causes them some problems with doing diplomacy in China. But the goal of diplomacy in China is sort of to get control, right? So it's to get control of the militaries, though. So far, we haven't seen anything to convince me to get rid of these. All right, we have our first home front marker. And we'll put that over on this because it's going to go in the cup next time. That's the French. The French get a big 1 die because they have a 1 effectiveness. And they succeed. Awesome. 5 or 6 succeeds. That means they don't lose any stability, which is kind of important because their stability sucks. They get to reposition their forces. Well, I think the forces they have are exactly where they want them, so we're not going to do that. The Russians get an infantry. Put it down. We build it in Moscow, and we ship it down to the Ukraine. Okay. Nothing exciting there. The French didn't have a flag, so they're not. Okay, now we get our Russian home front. The Russians have 2 dice for their home front. They succeed. They don't slip further. And now I am allowed to get a free redeployment of my posture, which I'm going to change. Where's the question? Do I want political purges or do I want collective security? Political purges makes it bad for me to do diplomacy and bad at combat, but I can do internal things like gearing up better. Collective security makes me not have a penalty in diplomacy, but I can't play or reserve offensives and I have to reject them. I don't know which way to go. I'm going to roll a die. In the game we played, the Russians went with collective security. It gives them a shot at getting things like the Baltic states and maybe other things, but which seem, without a military operation. And we're going to go to political purges, actually, and just try to keep our capabilities to gear up and such not in better shape. Okay, now, if that hadn't been a red home front, I could trigger my red flag, but I can't do it just yet. So we pull another counter, and we get the Civil War resolution. We have 2 civil wars to deal with. The first one's over here in Spain. Whew. Let's see how this is resolved. And I kind of know, but I find I need to look everything up. Okay, so this is a normal civil war. It has no aid in it. The player who drew the marker determines the order of resolution. We're going to do the Spanish first. It doesn't really make a damn bit of difference. I don't know who drew the marker anyway. Probably the Russians. I think they went last. That's if you're shifting the markers. If you're playing with something like, always give it the person with the least victory points draws the markers, which is one option. Then there's other facets to this, but yeah. So okay, so each faction is going to have 2 dice, and I don't think there's anything special because there's no support here. So we're going to go with the communist faction and the fascist faction. We'll just roll all the dice at once. Okay, so the communists got a 5. The leftists got a 5. The rightists got a 3. That means the Civil War is over. It was won without anybody getting a chance to do anything, because there was no aid to exchange there. There's no influence markers. So I think I can just get rid of this. And there are no patrons, so nobody gets control of the area, in which case Spain has just kind of stabilized all by itself. The Chinese Civil War. This works a little differently. Now, there can be another Spanish Civil War. It's very likely they keep breaking up. So for the Chinese Civil War, the first thing we do is we check to see if it's active or not. It is active, not just because the marker's there, but because there are no enemy cubes. Let me check this. If any Chinese country is garrisoned, so there are enemy cubes but no enemy troops there. The patrons are the most cubes in the areas occupied by the faction's armies. That's none. Then after that, most aid to the faction's markers. So that's going to be the Russians and the Germans of all people. They start with some support there. Okay. If the Civil War is active, which it is, the more numerous faction must attack an area with an opposing army if possible. If the 2 factions are tied, they are not. The GMD must attack. Do not move the attacking army into the area. The attack will be done as a normal Civil War, but with the following modifiers if the roll's tied. Okay. So if it's active, the more numerous faction must attack. The more numerous is going to be the GMD, and the Germans control the decision here. Now, the Germans have the option of trying to wipe out the communists, and the war could end. The Chinese Civil War could essentially just end based on that. Is that something I want? Well, one problem with that is the nationalists are very quickly spread all over the place. On the other hand, maybe that's not necessarily. So I think the best thing I can do is help the Japanese by attacking with this one. So, somewhere there was I remember something about attacks at 1 die or 2 dice based on something. I need to look this up. As far as I can see, we just get dice. The fascist controlled faction is going to only get 2 dice, but the aid gives the communists an extra die. The fascists get a 4 to a 3. That means the aid marker is destroyed. It goes back into the available Soviet aid marker, so offensives. Because there was an aid marker here, the Chinese communists are not defeated. There's no expansion because the battle was ineffectual, and that is the 2 civil wars, in effect, both resolved to whatever extent they will be at this turn. They may come up and get, they'll come up and get the Chinese. They'll keep having their civil war happen throughout the course of the game. At this point, the Russians have their chit they could use. Now, they could mobilize their army. That would allow them to start doing violent things. I think that sounds like a good idea. Violence is good. Germany's weak. Why don't we try it? Okay. So we're going to spend our chip, our flag, and this is trumping in. Japan does not want to over-trump them. And try to go up to rearmament. Our chances of doing this aren't particularly good. So we've got 2 dice, but they're not bad. We succeed. We have gone to rearmament. We will get 4 more armies, and our production has gone up. It was important to do this after the home front chit was picked, because now we don't have a home front stability check, which we might have had otherwise. And I hope I didn't roll it. I know I succeeded because they didn't drop. I actually think I've been rolling them for the French as well. They didn't have to roll either because they're in civilian production. The only people who have to roll right now are the Japanese, but the Soviets have just mobilized. Now I get to add 4 units to my force pool, and I think that's it. I don't think I get any commitment offensives from this. What do I want to do? I wanted to reallocate my forces when that home front marker came up. The Russians actually did want to do that. I definitely want 2 infantry and an air force. I am going to also get a tank improvement marker. And that gives me quite a bit of capability going forward. Now, the problem is that's a provocation against Germany and Japan. Japan has a reserve. They don't want to take anything else. Germany also has a reserve. They don't want to take anything else. And more chits get added to the cup, right? Let's see what happens from this. We get a German flag. What do we want to do with a German flag? Well, we're scared of the Russians now, right? Maybe we need to get the jump on the mobilization, but maybe there's something else we want to do. There is. We would like to remilitarize the Rhineland. We want that production. So we get 3 dice. We're going to try to do it politically. And it's a success. That flips this over. But that is a provocation against France and its allies. So France will get a flag, which we'll just put in the reserve space. Now, since Germany just did that, other people can trump in, notably France. Does France want to do something? Well, probably. Let me think. I have had my home front marker go. I could begin rearmament, which would of course be somewhat useful. There's something I really liked in the game I was playing though, which is I am going to use the French to pressure the Americans into getting a flag. The Americans don't give flags normally. This is the way to get the trade with Japan canceled. It doesn't work, but I do get a pip in the pressure marker. And I'm just going to work on that because I don't have to worry. I'm in civilian government. I don't have to worry about things collapsing yet. So I don't have to try to work my stability up, although that might be valuable too. Okay. The Japanese could trump in. They haven't had a home front marker, so they would rather not. And speaking of which, there it is. Japanese home front. They actually have to roll. Everybody else has rolled. Nobody else has had to. Luckily, nothing got changed. The Japanese had a failure, which means their stability drops down. Well, we can't have that. We can't trigger this just yet, though. So we draw, and it's a German flag. What do the Germans want to do with a flag? Jeez, I don't know. Have we had our home front marker yet? We have not. We are going to... We're going to propaganda. We get a success, and our stability goes up. Mobilizing is of some value, but with the home front marker not played yet this turn, we're taking another danger towards, falling further down. That means we still can't do the Japanese because that faction just went. The US gets an airplane. I will put that airplane here and fly it out to the Hawaiian Islands. I can't go out to the Philippines or anything. Right, the Japanese just had their marker. We're going to play this and try to do a stabilization propaganda action. We succeed. Marker goes forward. How are we doing? Third crisis. That means this is going to flip over. Next crisis could end the turn. We don't know how many chips there are. There feel like there's a fair number in there. The Japanese went last. They get this, 21. International incident. Roll 2 dice and take only the highest result. The powers indicated each gain a flag. So that's 5. Italy and France gain a flag. Well, France will put its theirs. Italy still has that there, so that applies there. Okay. U.S. Home front, no problem. They're in civilian state. But I could reorganize my forces. I am going to do so. I am going to push everything into California. It can't go further than that because there's a delay box there. This fleet could go out to Pearl Harbor. Okay. It's very, very hard for Germany to launch an invasion of the U.S. Okay, last of the crisis markers. So now we spill out the cup, and there are 2 Italian markers. Italy's in civilian status. That means the turn keeps going. These other markers are also in there, and the crisis marker has to go back in. Il Duce. What do I do with him? Jeez. We had trouble making this decision last time. I think we're going to go with the Abyssinian adventure again. It successfully commits to a military action. So now we roll dice equal to the number of actions spent. On a 5 or more, we flip the marker and give Italy a cube. It's a 5 or more. So the Abyssinian adventure flips over. Italy gets a bonus cube, which is worth a victory point. This is the first victory point in the game, I think. And they have their bonus point. Now, this didn't provoke anyone, did it? This is a provocation against France and the United Kingdom. That may not be the wisest thing to do. UK goes here, France throws in the cup. All right. Now we know that there are not enough chips in here, unless France has 2 now. That means France and the UK each have things they want to do. France is going to keep pressuring the US. That's what they're going to do with their chip. They have a pip in here, so they get +1 to their die roll. A 2, that's not going to do it, but we get another one here. As France is putting demands on, hey, you got to stop trading with Japan because, I don't know. I got no good argument for that. I can't trump in with Britain. So now we get the Italian home front marker. They're not mobilized, so there's no problem there. Is there anything they want to do? Not particularly. In terms of redeployment. The British home front, no problem there either. The Brits do not want to do any redeployment. They want to keep their forces pretty much as they have them. A French flag. Let's keep doing our policy. Now it's at +2. A 3. And the collection of cubes of shame can get quite large for some countries. And now it's really hard to go any other direction. Japanese. Japanese have their stability up. We are already sitting here in rearmament. We could try to up that another one. That doesn't sound like a terrible idea. Yeah, let's mobilize. Or should we do something? Yeah, we'll mobilize. This is very attractive, but I can't get there very easily. I have a successful mobilization. That shifts me over here. I will be provoking Russia and the US. Well, France couldn't do it. And we'll put these both in here for easy access because people want to make sure that they get the actions, the important flag actions. Now, that gives me 3 extra force pool units, and I get commitment offensives equal to 2. So those are going to go in the cup because I have 2 industrial. You don't have to be belligerent for those to happen. As far as I remember, I have to look that up because The way we played it today, they didn't, but something's nagging at the back of my head. That's not right. And then I have to figure out 3 more units. Now, I can't build navies without without discarding the Washington Naval Treaty. This might be the time to do it because then I can start upgrading my fleet capacity. But the problem is the U.S. gets so many more counters that they can put out such a powerful navy. Whereas if I can keep parity through the Washington Naval Treaty, why don't we do that? Okay, so the Japanese get 2 of these. They're going to drop 1 here and 1 in the cup. These are their mobilization offensives. They just did the mobilization so someone else can go. I got to try to figure out, does Russia have something they want to do in reaction? They'd like to play this chip. They've already mobilized. They suck at diplomacy at this point because we're at political purges. We could do something like building the Trans-Siberian Railway. That sounds like an interesting idea. Let's try that. That'll make it easier to move between these, and it also gives them their special ability to have 2 units per space in their home areas in Asia, and that is successful. So put that here. That gets rid of the delay box, and it gets rid of the Russian flag. Well, Japanese can play their offensive now. Their offensive will gain 2 attacks. I'll use a couple of these markers to mark it. And we are going to attack. We're going to attack here in Hebi. We send an infantry in, and we throw an air force in. We're going to keep the other offensive. For what reason? So that we can keep pushing forward, I guess. Now, yeah. We want to do something with the other offensive. We don't know what yet. It's probably shift forces. Okay, so this is not a surprise attack. It's nothing particularly special. It's a land combat. We have air superiority, so we get an additional die. That gets us to 3 dice. The Chinese get 2 dice. They have no aid. We didn't augment. It's not adverse terrain. No fortress, no supplies. Okay, so the Japanese beat the Chinese by 1. Now, the Chinese can retreat out of there. They have a place they can retreat to. And the Japanese take the space. I'm going to put this here. I get a cube that gets me a victory point, and a victory point for fascism, and it's almost over democracy, which changes the nature of things. It puts the onus of prosecuting the war on the democracies, perhaps, which can lead to some kind of pathological situations. And now, let me make sure I'm correct there. Yes, I am able to retreat. I could keep pressing against Chahar. I think that's worthwhile. So I'm going to use my second and throw my air in there, and that'll also be 3 dice to 2. We get even, which means both armies are destroyed, and I did not capture Hebi or Chahar, and I fall back. And that was my second operation there. I've got another operation chit. We'll see how that works out. I gotta swap batteries. Now, this was not in anyone's interest, this space. So, Guangdong is. That's in the British interest. The British or the Americans could do something. The Americans are going to expend their chit to try to revoke the trade with the Japanese. They fail, and they get something in their special actions. I can't do the British immediately. So we pull, and it's a crisis chit. I think that's going to be it. Yep, there's a Japanese and a German marker, and that's it. So, 4 crisis chits are going to go over here to join those others. And we watch what happens at the end of a turn. There's a sequence for each of these. If Civil War or home fronts were left, those would get resolved. Flags, offensives, units, and upgrade markers go into the production holding box. Powers move the reserve to the production holding box. That's these. So the Germans get a resource, the Italians get a resource, the Brits get a flag. These are available for next turn. They don't lose them completely. Commitment, effectiveness, and Soviet posture are flipped. This should have been flipped over. It wasn't. Japanese commitment has been increased as they're going on to at least sort of a limited war footing by attacking into China. Not terribly effective, though. And the turn marker becomes not sudden death. We'll put all these counters. These are just the auto markers in there. And then these guys are going to be available. And that's the first turn of the game, the 33 to 34 turn. And we see the Japanese have already started into China. Otherwise, not a whole hell of a lot's happened. Mobilization of Russia, that's a little scary. But it is possible that the Allies could end up going against Russia if Russia starts doing too well, and if the Axis does not do well. There's no reason that, like in Triumph and Tragedy, and not like in Hitler's War, there is the possibility that the main alliance, that the ideologies don't fall out in quite the way that they would normally fall out. It's unlikely. The Axis has a lot of advantages towards getting the war going in their direction, but you got to be careful. And you could beat Germany and then roll into Russia, a la Patton's ideas. All right, let's send this one up.